Morning again and welcome. You're watching News Central now on News Central Television. My name is Mazino. The top stories this hour. Survivors recount experience after tanker explosion that claimed about 150 lives. And NLC and TUC leaders meet federal government for talks on fuel price hike with outcome unknown. Kenya Senate opens impeachment hearings against Deputy President. Details coming up shortly. Now the news begins in northern Nigeria, where survivors of the fuel tank explosion in Jigawa State have given their account of how crowds of people had rushed to collect fuel spilling from the crashed tanker before the blast happened. The survivors explained how they narrowly escaped the explosion, which tore through the crowd, killing at least 147 people. The explosion occurred around 12:30 a.m. yesterday when the driver of the tanker en route from Kano to Nguru in Yobe State lost control near Khadija University, Majiya, according to the police. Now, according to the police public relations officer of the Jigawa State Command, Lawan Adam, the tragedy was triggered by residents rushing to collect spilled petrol after the tanker overturned. Meanwhile, a mass burial has been held for the victims of the tragic tanker explosion.
Na ebo mai na ke son farko gida na dawo kenan na aje mashina na cikin gyara shi wutan nan ta tashi ina gudun tsira take kowa ce makamin a lokacin wannan Allah ya ce mai kan mashinan da suke gurin wannan ni nawa ne kadai Allah ya sa ya tsira da ni da shi da Allah bai sa na shi cikin wannan gurin ba bayan haka da ni ma ina cikin gurin inda wannan mutane suke ina tsaye haka bayan mutane su dan iba an samu wajen minti ma 30 ma zuwa 40 ana iban wannan man ana tafiya da shi to titin ma ya bushe ba wani maganar laima ko wani abu mai daga baya kawai muna tsaye haka daidai inda mutane su kone muna ciki kawai sai wani abu buu haka ya to gaba daya shi wuta ce
oil thinking that it's an off. They didn't know, little did they know that it is a cause of death. So some of them that engaged in fetching this fuel were caught up with the fire. In the process of taking, there is a flash of light and the place caught fire.
In the meantime, President Bola Tinubu has directed the Secretary to the government of the Federation George Akume to lead a federal government delegation to Jigawa in response to the tanker explosion in Majiya town, which claimed over 100 lives. The government delegation will comprise the Ministers of Defense, Minister Badaru Abubakar, Minister of Transportation Saidu Al-Khali, Co-Marshal of the Federal Road Safety Commission Shehu Mohammed, and the Senior Special Assistant of the President on Community Engagement, that is Abdullahi Yakasai. While in Jigawa, the delegation will visit the scene of the incident to assess the situation and visit injured persons in the hospital. And the presidency says the absence of President Tinubu and Vice President Kashim Shettima in the country does not create any leadership vacuum. While Tinubu departed from the country on October 2nd, 2024 for a 2-week working leave, Shettima left Abuja on Wednesday for Sweden on a 2-day visit to represent Nigeria in bilateral engagements with the Scandinavian nation. In a statement on Wednesday, the Special Advisor to the President on Information and Strategy, Bayo Onanuga, said that the two leaders are fully engaged with the nation's affairs, even while they are away. Onanuga also noted that all state organs are functioning as usual. Now to the fuel price hike. The leaders of the Nigeria Labour Congress and the Trade Union Congress met with representatives of the federal government at the office of the Secretary to the Government of the Federation over the recent hike in fuel prices. Present at the meeting were the National Security Advisor, Malam Nuhu Ribadu, Labour Minister Nkiruka Onyejiocha, the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Wale Edun. Others in attendance include Mohammed Idris, Information Minister Heineken Lokwebiri, Minister of State for Petroleum Perikwe Ekpo, Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, and representatives of the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation Limited. The outcome of the meeting is yet to be made public. Now joining us on the news to discuss this is Dr. a public affairs analyst. Dr. You're welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning. All right, Doctor, I'm hoping that we can hear you. Hopefully your device is not on mute. But I'm going to go ahead and ask my first question now. We hear that the representatives of the Nigeria Labour Congress and the Trade Union Congress are in a meeting with the federal government. Though we've not heard any outcome, what expectations are you expecting?
Okay, if you remember, let me take you a bit back so that we can put this in perspective. The Labour Union came out to say that one of the agreements they had with the federal government was the fact that nothing will tamper with fuel price at this point, and that's after they've gone back and forth on the minimum wage, which is Labour had actually demanded about 500,000. They moved to about 250,000, and at a point, they had to agree for about 70,000 because there was this caveat in the entire discussion that pump price will reasonably be stable. And at this point in time, moving the price from where it was to over 1,000 naira without consultation with Labour is something that I think is not noble enough. So from here, we can peep into the hall, into the meeting table, and know that the conversation is around the fact that, oh, we do not want to see the federal government as a betrayer. Because if we had a conversation and we had an agreement and we agreed that, oh, we can actually settle for around 70,000 without any tampering with the fuel price, and the federal government is seemingly coming from the back door to have this increase, I think is point of concern. So I think Labour will be insistent on reversal to the old price. Unfortunately, we are not even talking about the price of petrol any longer. We're also talking about scarcity. And one of the things we're expecting is that even if it's around 800 and 900, there will be surplus of it in the community places. But it's just too tragedy of increase and scarcity. And I think that's what the conversation was all about.
So if there's no going back on the price, seeing that there's this insistence on the removal of subsidy, what could be put in place by governments to alleviate the hardship of the people in the country and the ripple effect of this fuel price increase?
Okay, we have seen that government intervention does not take care of the entire community, but price of petrol actually affects everyone. For example, you see that they could just say poorest of the poor and pick a few people within the community and say, oh, we're transferring conditional transfer of 5,000 or 10,000. But you and I all know the fact that this kind of package does not affect the entire community. And you cannot have a population of over 250 million people who are heavily dependent on petrol. And this has been my agitation. I am not even concerned about how much people buy petrol. I'm concerned about the fact that there are things that can be done that can separate the lives of people from dependence on petrol. For instance, if electricity is available and accessible by the people, you discover that they are dependent on petrol will be reduced. If there's efficient public transport system in Nigeria, you will see that the dependence on petrol will be reduced. So I think heavily we must first of all make deliberate investment in areas that will keep people's lives out of dependence of petrol. Then at that point in time, we can be talking about, oh, selling a liter for 1,000 naira. So I think the major focus now should not even be handing 10,000, handing 5,000 as conditional cash transfer to people. It is a deliberate strategic approach to solving this problem that matters. And what is this approach? You must deliberately deliver the people from dependence on petrol. And the only way to do this is to make public transport efficient. And I keep saying it's a philosophy we develop and we keep laying emphasis on it. The concept of prosperity should not be that a few of us are doing well within the community. And when I mean a few of us, you may actually be referring to the politician. The concept of prosperity is when your leaders can actually take to public transport. And the only way to make that happen, as you see them in the UK jumping train, you see them all over the place hanging in buses, and they snap themselves and they make it available. We must be able to replicate it here in a way that will make our public transport efficient enough that people will not be dependent on petrol. So communal prosperity will solve our dependence on petrol. And the only way we can know whether our community is actually prosperous is to have public transport working, is to have our power sector efficient and our housing sector on point.
Dotun, we had recently a representative of the World Bank telling that Nigeria indeed needs to stay in these reform status for at least 15 years. I was wondering what your take on that is when you juxtapose it to the suffering that people are going through with the effect of the reforms.
Anywhere you have seen reform over the years, they will always come with suffering. But here's my fear about our own kind of reform. When you see the reformer trying to rebuild a process, it comes with pain. And one of the principles of change management is also to oil the chain of change so that it doesn't choke your people to death. That's one. Number two, the reformer also must prove to the people that it doesn't have interest to benefit from the process of reformation. What we've had now is that we believe that we have a reformer in power, but the fear of the community is that the reformer is reforming in a way that shows that maybe at the end of the day, he has something he wants to directly benefit. And I'm going to quote the People's Democratic Party, the PDP, who has consistently accused the federal government of having interest, even in the Lagos-Calabar road that the government is constructing. So there have been acquisitions here and there. So our fear as a people is not the pain that comes with the process of reformation. It is the fact that we suspect so strongly that maybe the reformers also have interest. And once the reformer has interest or benefit in the process of reformation, the people become the victim. And ordinarily, the people are supposed to be the beneficiary of the process of reformation. So that's just the fear.
Well, thank you very much, Dotun. That's, well, your submission is well taken. Thank you indeed.
It's a pleasure.
Now, in the meantime, the House of Representatives has called on the federal government to immediately reverse the recent hike in the price of petrol and cooking gas, given the current economic hardship being felt across the country. The price of premium motor spirit, also known as petrol, jumped to 1,013 naira per litre, resulting in an increase in transportation costs across major cities in Nigeria. The resolution of the House praying for the intervention of the executive arm of government followed the adoption of a motion of urgent public importance moved on the floor of the Green Chamber during Wednesday's plenary session by the Minority Leader, Kingsley Chinda, and 100 others. To discuss this, we're joined by Public Affairs Analyst Shola Omolayo. Shola, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, sir, and good morning, Nigeria.
Indeed. Now, what were your initial thoughts on this reactionary response by our reps, and what are the chances anything will come out of it?
Nothing. Nothing is going to come out of it. I want to assume that we are having a legislature that cannot back. I mean, it cannot back, they cannot bite. They are just there. Many laws, many instruction, many advice they've given to parasectors. Nothing comes out of it. Nothing. I don't see anything coming out of this. I don't see anything. And it's so insulting that we are depending on a private institution to salvage our nation in what matters so much, the primary channel that Nigeria and Nigerians are using to breathe. That is the value they place on our breath, like the careless. Joking, the president says, let the poor breathe. But now, the poor is not breathing. The poor are choking. Nothing is going to come out of that. Bring it down. Bring it down a little bit. Shift to the table a little bit. Do you know the numbers of laws and instruction this same assembly have given to the discourse and the genco of this world? What happened? They told us, you must not do anything to the increment if not ABC has been done. What happened? Do they obey? Meter must be given all out right before their faces. Meters has now been capitalized that you must buy. No wahala. That's the situation. Even those who own network, they still give out fuel with a benefit. That is the country we find ourselves. You are talking of fuel. The common man needs start from the light and the fuel. What do we achieve from them? Is there any the assembly? They can only do things and work on things that is so important to them, and that they can glory in it, not what matters to the common man. Petrol. Formerly it was kerosene. Kerosene. Do you know how much they sell that thing now? That ought to be the poor man needs. It's no more at that ladder anymore. We were deceived. It shifted to diesel. You know what diesel is costing now? And people are saying it's not about the cost, it's about the availability. What is the difference of the two? Just tell me. Tell me how we got how we crippled from 140 naira per liter to this very point today. You say subsidy. What is the margin of the subsidy of that 140 naira there? And you're telling us it's a dollar variation? Who is asking question? How many times have they called the Oga of NNPC to come to the parliament? Has he responded? What question?
Now, Mr. Malaya,
what?
Mr. Malaya, so it's one thing for the reps to actually slam the FG's decision to let the price go or increase the price, but what urgent and pragmatic steps can the reps now take to actually help the situation, to help put this escalating economic crisis in its place?
I always love this when I big grammar when I speak. Let me ask you: a teacher comes to the class and is asking the students, "How do we solve this mathematics? Should that be the ideas of the children or the suggestion of the children or the master who owns the subject and the class at that time?" They have all the ideas. They presented all the things that is needed. What of the enforcement? Hello? What of the enforcement, for God's sake? We speak all this grammar, they come to station, they go to all the medias, either print media or which other one? Where do they go? You see them speak good grammar. But once they turn back, they begin to laugh. You talk of assembly on this ground, what can they do? All the laws they have passed, how have they been able to execute it? The channels that ought to fine-tune the pricing of this fuel, which ought to be the NNPC, is no more NNPC, it's now NNPCL. It's a private company. And Nigerians, we godly accept it as if we don't know what we are doing. A private company that ought to have a share, that ought to have shareholders, are the ones determining our life. It's not more the government. And you are talking of a National Assembly? What can they do? If they take up any decision, there is a law that's going to bind them up. Even Dangote find it very difficult to take a decision without following the line of NNPC. Do you think we know what we are doing? Do you think anything is organized in this country anymore? The question is, if anybody can just answer me this simple question, how do we got here? One, what is the marginal cost of the subsidy between that 140 naira that was roaming? People forget. People quickly forget that the former vice president of this country told us, if you go back into your archive, you will find it. When they increased the fuel to about 140 naira plus, they said, within a couple of months, you will see the fuel going down to at least 40 naira. That because subsidy has been removed. If subsidy was removed, that we find our fuel at 140 naira, what was the margin of the subsidy that was being paid? We just jump into issue and we begin to discuss from the top. Why can't we go back to history? Knowledge told me that once you forget your history, you will know where you are going. Now we are discussing 1,030 naira or 900 and something naira, if you care to say. Before you know it, we might end up with 2,500, and we will still be talking about availability of this product. Right. Have you also forgotten the same NNPC that has been saying they are going to be selling? They will start production. They've given date till we got to this point. Nothing has been done. Not until when they even told us that the capacity of the NNPC is just about 5 million.
All right, Mr. Malayo.
What this 5 million company want to compete with a Dangote that has the biggest refinery? And they're telling us that what you read the assembly, or what can the assembly member do? Like they don't know? Like they were not part of this conspiracy?
Well, Mr. Malayo, we want to say that you...
Do you know people are dying almost every day? Because of this simpler act. It's a pimple. When a pimple, if you don't manage it very well, it turns to a boil. From boil, it becomes what you call cancer. And when it gets to cancer, it's either it defaults you or it kills the person who carries it.
Mr. Malayo, thank you very much for sharing your views, and they're well noted. And that question is actually one that echoes what is the marginal cost of the subsidy that was removed. Thank you very much, sir, for being on with us here today.
Thank you for having me. God bless Nigeria.
Now, Lagos State Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu has disclosed that the state will pay 85,000 naira minimum wage to its workers, which is 15,000 naira higher than the 70,000 naira approved by the federal government in July. President Bola Tinubu signed the new 70,000 naira minimum wage bill into law in July, ending months of deliberations between government representatives, labor unions, and the private sector. Meanwhile, Governor Sanwo-Olu explained the state is not paying 85,000 naira to outdo others, but because it has the capacity to do so. The governor also revealed that the state had earlier in the year increased the salaries of workers, adding that it is his wish to be able to make the minimum wage of 100,000 naira in January 2025. It's now time for a break, and when we return, Nigeria Economic Summit wraps with experts proffering solutions. We have the details when we get back. Join us then. Welcome back. Now to updates on the NES 30 as it wrapped. At Nigeria's Economic Summit 30, Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan Chase, spoke about the reasons for attending the summit and the bank's strategic effort to expand into Africa, which are fueled by growth opportunities in commercial and investment banking, treasury services, and lending.
Some with more difficulty than others, and your policy really matters inside countries. And technology is, has cured so many ills and problems. I know the Gates Foundation is here. I think AI will be another round of technology, which will probably cure some cancers. And that's kind of an amazing thing. And while sometimes technology is disruptive, it is also the thing that lifts up mankind over many years. So I'm optimistic about the technology. We have to navigate the complex geopolitics, but hopefully mankind will continue to grow, get healthier over time, and good policies and good medicine and good issues will circulate the world. And I'm hoping that America, plays a very healthy part. Like one of the reasons I'd like to be here is America should play a very healthy part in expanding into Africa, helping African nations, through diplomacy and business and foreign investment, education, all those things which can actually help.
Now, the 30th Nigerian Economic Summit came to a close on Wednesday after 3 days of high-level panel sessions, roundtables, and plenaries. The summit, with the team Collaborative Action for Growth, Competitiveness, and Stability conference highlighted the challenges in the Nigerian economy, reviewed the government's monetary and fiscal reforms, while also gauging impact and expected outcome. New Central's business correspondent Perpetua Fasami Peter was there and tells us more.
The 30th Nigerian Economic Summit holding right here in Abuja. The first 2 days focused on the Nigerian government's reforms and the impact the reforms are having on businesses, individuals, and consumers. But for today being the third and, of course, the last day, the conversation is shifting and the focus today is on food security and tackling hunger. This is quite instructive, looking at the fact that Nigeria loses 50% of its farm produce post-harvest. Now the question is, will these conversations be instrumental in turning the tide and making Nigeria more food secure? Well, we'll find out about that.
Hunger and deprivation and food insecurity is in the rural areas, but lately recent statistics seem to suggest urban hunger is even as considerable as rural hunger.
The issues of banditry, farmers paying ransom, they are real, and it's something the government needs to address. But is that what is killing food security or making us food insecure in the country today? I beg to differ. Majority of the farmers don't have access to inputs, fertilizer, quality seeds. That's why our yields are below African average, way below global averages, right?
We must organize our small-scale farmers into larger associations so that they can be aggregated to scale.
Looking back to day one of the event, the highlight of the day was the Vice President's speech, where he maintained that the reforms undertaken by the administration were necessary, though painful.
Yes, some of these decisions are unpopular, but the truth that sets men free, as H.S. Aga said, is most often the truth that men prepare not to hear.
The stance was further corroborated by the World Bank's country director.
The projection now is that revenue to GDP is projected to increase from 7.6% to 10.5%. 3 percentage point increase in 1 year, it's unheard of.
Irrespective of the government's reforms, it is clear that some macroeconomic indicators remain unfavorable, highlighting the need for the government to measure, monitor, and speed up its interventions and fiscal reforms.
The debt service to revenue ratio is still high. Rebuilding trust is an urgent imperative and will require sacrifices by all and sundry, and especially our political leaders, to foster a sense of we're in this together.
Thought-provoking, exhilarating, actionable, and real. These words describe the conversations and thoughts that have been shared during the course of this summit. But much more than this, Nigerians want to see these thoughts then become implemented policies, and not only that, they also want to see more monies in their wallets, as that will be the only metric to confirm or to ascertain that this particular summit has been a success. In Abuja, for News Central, I am Perpetua Fasami Peter.
And still on the summit, agricultural stakeholders have expressed worry over the unwillingness of African governments to commit 10% of their budget to agriculture, in line with the Malabo 2014 agreement, thereby threatening Africa's food security. This was during a plenary session on the sidelines of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group in Abuja with the theme Tackling Hunger. News Central's Joshua Imirai has more on that report.
The engagement of the Oil and Gas High-Level Panel, which was held on the sidelines of the 30th Nigerian Economic Summit. The workshop with the theme Fueling Growth, the Future of Oil and Gas, saw the convergence of Nigeria's top investors in the oil and gas sector. The Chief Executive Officer of the Nigerian Liquefied Natural Gas Company lamented the decreased investment in the petroleum sector, saying it has hampered exploration and development.
Investment has slowed over the past decade within the upstream oil and gas sector. Coming out of COVID, I don't think the industry ever recovered. But coupled on top of the declining investment, there's also then been the security issue in the environment.
Some stakeholders, however, expressed their views on calls for a reduction of the country's dependence on oil.
Yes, we're talking about net zero in 2060, but we first got to understand what do we have as a people, natural resources. In terms of the natural resources we have, what ranks the highest? Oil and gas.
You need oil to diversify out of oil. So we would indeed have to diversify as a country, but that doesn't mean we should neglect our oil resources. Oil will still be with us for quite a while.
The call of stakeholders in the private and public sector to collaborate and tackle the issue of security affecting Nigeria's oil and gas sector. In Abuja for News Central, I am Joshua Imarai.
Now, away from that, the 30th edition of the Nigerian Economic Summit wrapped up with a strong focus on sustainable development and collaborative efforts to drive progress across the country. With the theme centered on collaboration and collective action, the final day of the summit in Abuja featured dynamic conversations aimed at addressing critical challenges facing Nigeria and Africa as a whole. News Central's Chidema Ona shares more.
In November, we're going to have the joint annual review where...
During day 3 of the Nigerian Economic Summit, panel discussions generated thought-provoking debates on how to accelerate progress in key areas. These discussions raised important questions about how to foster sustainable development and drive meaningful change at both national and regional levels. Speaking during the summit, the United Nations Development Programme Resident Representative for Nigeria highlighted the slow pace of progress towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals in Africa. She stressed the need for capacity building and a renewed commitment to accelerating efforts across the continent.
There is no way that you can move the needle on development if the very people who are to move the needle on development don't have what it takes to do that. And that will require for a deeper reflection, for example, in our public sector, and how we can engage a public sector in a proactive way. Public sector reforms, ensuring that people know how to use big data, need to know how to do risk analysis, need to know how to do investment analysis. This is very, very important in terms of capacity building.
Muyi Aino, the representative of the Minister of Health, focused on the gaps within the healthcare sector that are hindering the country's progress towards the SDGs. He outlined key areas where improvements are needed, including healthcare infrastructure and access to quality care.
How do we accelerate certain outcomes that relate to the SDGs? How do we rapidly reduce maternal mortality? How do we increase immunization coverage? How do we improve the quality of our health services? And so we came up with a health sector blueprint. First pillar of that is around governance of the health sector. How do we improve accountability and coordination of the health sector?
On the topic of investment in Africa, Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan, provided insights into how sustainable investments can play a role in the continent's development. He spoke on the need to balance governance with the well-being of the people.
It's done pretty well. You know, over the last, even since the World War II, billions of people have been taken out of poverty. You know, most countries are developing over time.
The summit concluded with remarks from Nigeria's Minister of Budget and Economic Planning, Atiku Bagudu, who thanked participants for their engagement and contributions. In his closing statement, Bagudu acknowledged the importance of such platforms in shaping the nation's economic future and urged stakeholders to continue their efforts towards driving sustainable growth.
Encouraged by the successes so far, that we are confident the economy has turned in the right direction. I'm sure one question that will be on the mind of many is, will they stay the course? Yes, we will stay the course, encouraged by the commitment we saw around the room. Once again, I congratulate all of you on participating in this summit and your usual contribution. I am honored and privileged to declare the 30th Economic Summit closed.
As the Nigerian Economic Summit marked its 30th anniversary, the key takeaway was clear. Nigeria's progress depends on collective action, collaboration, and sustained focus on long-term development goals. In Lagos for News Central, I am Chidema Ona.
Coming up, Kenya Senate opens impeachment hearings against Deputy President. And we'll bring you the details after this short break. Welcome back. Now, Kenya's Senate began impeachment hearings against Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua on Wednesday, hours after a court said the proceedings were constitutional, clearing the way for a vote on his dismissal this week. This follows the Kenya's National Assembly voting to impeach the Deputy President on 11 charges, which include corruption, undermining the government, and stirring ethnic hatred. However, Gachagua has denied all charges. He had launched a legal challenge against the impeachment proceedings in the High Court, but Judge Eric Ogola said the process could go ahead. Now, the deputy president was Ruto's running mate in their 2022 election win, helping secure vital votes from the popular central Kenyan region. But he has since fallen out and political alliances have shifted. So joining us on this to discuss this is Tele Nzomo, Program Officer, Siasa Place, Nairobi. Tele, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you. Now, how have Kenyans reacted to the impeachment and the corruption charges against the vice president? Do you see any significant shifts in public sentiments toward the corruption charges?
I don't think Kenyans think, or the entire process has not been about corruption. This has been more of a political process. And I think Kenyans know and understand that this is more of a political issue. I think Kenyans have actually been a bit feeling like their issues are not actually being dealt with, that the cost of living is not being dealt with, and rather our politicians are busy playing politics and trying to maneuver in a political manner, rather than actually dealing with Kenyan issues.
So one has to ask how this situation reflects Kenya's historical struggle with corruption, and what can we learn from the previous high-profile corruption cases in the country?
This is not really about corruption, to be particularly honest with you. It's more of a fight between the president and his deputy. In the previous administration, we saw an issue where there was corruption. We saw issues between. We saw issues between the president and his deputy, and we saw Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto actually fall out, and that led to an issue where William Ruto said that the same thing wouldn't happen to him and his deputy president, but actually now we've seen an even worse fallout where it's actually led to impeachment. So this has not been really about corruption, it's been about the fight between the two individuals, or rather the two main people in our country.
Okay then. I hear you there, but in your opinion, what does the impeachment of the high-ranking officials like the vice president say about the effectiveness of Kenya's accountability mechanism? Are they becoming more robust or merely just symbolic?
I think it's more symbolic. I would answer it that way, because I think this is more about yes, there have been allegations against the deputy president. I don't want to say that he's been corrupt, because I will be, judging him, and I don't want to do that, in a public place. But there have been allegations. There are also allegations against other government officials. We saw allegations against the cabinet secretary for agriculture, but nothing happened to the cabinet secretary for agriculture. Actually, he was taken for impeachment, but it was actually shot down. So if you compare the two cases, you realize that it's not about corruption. This is about politics. So in both cases were brought to the floor of the House on corruption matters, one against the agriculture CS, one against the deputy president. And what ended up happening was that only one was actually charged. Only one is charged. And the way things seem, he's about to actually be impeached, at least the way things are going.
Finally, Tele, how do you see the vice president's impeachment aligning with the recent protests? Are these protests influencing government's actions, or are they being overshadowed by political maneuverings?
They're being overshadowed, but actually that's a perfect way of putting it. They're actually being overshadowed by political maneuverings. And I think that's actually a very sad thing of what's happening in the country. I think that what happened what happened with the protests was actually quite important. Kenyans came out and they were arguing against, number one, the finance bill, against the high cost of living. They came out in numbers, and it wasn't about tribalism. It wasn't about political parties. This was actually Kenyans coming and actually, protesting against government policies. And since then, what has happened is that we have seen government realigning. We saw William Ruto starting to pick cabinet secretaries from the ODM party. We saw, and since then now, it's led to this issue of the deputy president. So it's actually overshadowed it, and in my opinion, that's quite unfortunate.
Well, thank you very much, Tele, for joining us this morning to discuss this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you once again for having me.
Welcome back. Now, volunteers from a pro-abortion rights grassroots organization canvassed outside a Charlie XCX concert in Orlando and go door to door speaking with young voters to rally support for Amendment 4, which aims to restore the right to abortion until fetal visibility, or rather viability. Engaging concert goers like 25-year-old preschool teacher Gigi Fabrega, who shared her personal experience with abortion, the volunteers emphasized the importance of voting yes to protect reproductive freedom in Florida, less than a month from the U.S. elections.
Me, myself, I've had abortions in the past and it saved my life, like 100%. If I was in an abusive relationship, if I would have had the baby, I would be in a horrible place right now.
Trying to just make sure that people that might not typically vote, which are younger people, know that they have a right to reproductive freedom, especially after Amendment 4 gets passed on a 60% threshold. Every vote counts, so we know that Charlie fans really count in this election as well.
Progress Florida is really centered on Yes on 4 right now, so we approach that from a multitude of ways, through communications, through social media, and through field activities like we're doing today, where we're literally meeting voters face-to-face or over the phone to talk about why it's so important to vote yes.
I use doctor, and so I think it's something that should be a conversation that women have with their doctors. I actually, my very first pregnancy was a miscarriage after like 8 weeks. So, I mean, you don't even know sometimes, what's going on. So I think it's really important for women to be able to make.
Now we're going to go on a short break, and when we get back, Nigeria Premier Football League Ahmed Musa scores as Kano Pillars crush Rangers. When we return. Welcome back in our sports. Kano Pillars secured a dramatic 4-3 victory over reigning champions Enugu Rangers in their Nigeria Premier Football League Matchday 7 clash at Nnamdi Azikiwe Stadium on Wednesday. Super Eagles captain Ahmed Musa netted the 4th goal for the visitors, capping a dominant first-half performance that saw Pillars take a commanding 4-0 lead at halftime. Rabiu Ali opened the scoring with a penalty, followed by goals from Zulkifilu Mohammed and Musa, who also provided an assist. Rangers fought back in the second half, with Isaac Xavier scoring twice in the 47th and 59th minute. Emmanuel Nenrot added a 3rd goal for Rangers on the stroke of a full time, but the comeback fell short as Pillars held on for the win. And Nigeria's under-17 women's team, the Flamingos, kicked off their 2024 FIFA Under-17 Women's World Cup campaign with a commanding 4-1 victory over New Zealand on Wednesday in Santiago de los Caballeros. I beg your pardon. Now, Shakirat Mashoud gave Nigeria a first flying start by scoring just 80 seconds into the match at CFC Stadium, one of the fastest goals in the tournament history. Taiwo Adegoke doubled the lead in the 13th minute after VAR confirmed the goal, followed by Faridat Abdul Wahab's 28th minute strike. Captain Taiwo Afolabi made it 4-0 early in the second half. New Zealand's Saxon scored from a corner in the 60th minute, but Nigeria remained in control. The victory gives Nigeria 3 crucial points, and they will now face Ecuador on Saturday, aiming to secure a spot in the knockout stage. And Carlos Alcaraz is set for a challenging semi-final against his idol Rafael Nadal at the Six Kings Slam exhibition in Riyadh. With Nadal retiring after the Davis Cup finals, Alcaraz admitted it will be emotional facing the 22-time Grand Slam champion for the last time. The reigning French Open and Wimbledon champion emphasized the significance of sharing the court with Nadal, a key inspiration in his tennis career. Nadal holds a 2-1 advantage over Alcaraz in their 3 previous ATP Tour meetings. The two also played doubles together at the Paris Olympic this year and are expected to team up again at the Davis Cup finals. In the other semi-final, Novak Djokovic will face world number 1 Jannik Sinner, who recently defeated Daniil Medvedev 6-love, 6-3. Now, Sinner also beat Djokovic in the Shanghai Masters final. And that's all on the news this hour. But before we go, let's take another look at some of the major stories. We told you that survivors recounted their experience after tanker explosion claimed about 150 lives. NLC and TUC leaders meet federal government for talks on fuel price hike with outcome yet unknown. And finally, Kenyan Senate opens impeachment hearings against Deputy President. Now do remember you can watch News Central live on DSTV channel 422, Star Times channel 274, Able TV, and of course on YouTube. Many thanks for watching. My name is Mazino Appeal.